In this week's episode of CSI Katolis, the baker's jelly tarts have been stolen once again. He witnessed the tart theft, but the thief was disguised, so we can't be sure of who it was. Based on past jelly tart thievery, however, we suspect that it was one of the princes, Callum and Ezrin. Ezrin's glow toad named Bait, or King Harrow himself. We were able to collect DNA samples from the crime scene, the baker, and our 4 suspects. The samples were then amplified at 2 loci using PCR and then run using gel electrophoresis. The gels showing the DNA fingerprints of the samples can be seen here. We now need to identify the suspects whose DNA fingerprint completely matches the evidence sample found at the crime scene. Let's start with the baker. We can see here that neither allele at the first locus matches the crime scene sample. If you look at locus 2, you can see that the baker is a complete match at this locus. But because the first locus is not a match, the baker can be excluded from having left the evidence sample. Next, we'll look at Callum. At the first locus, Callum is a partial match. You can see that he has this allele in common with the crime scene sample. At the second locus, he has no alleles in common. Because Callum's DNA fingerprint does not completely match the crime scene sample, he can be excluded from having left the evidence sample. Like Callum, King Harrow is a partial match at the first locus. You can see that he has this allele in common with the evidence sample. He is also a partial match at locus 2. He has this allele in common, but this one is different. Because of this, King Harrow can be excluded from having left the evidence sample. Now we'll look at Ezrin's DNA fingerprints. We can see that Ez matches the crime scene sample at both alleles, here and here at the first locus. He is also a complete match at the second locus. You can see that here. Because Ezrin is a complete match at both loci, his DNA fingerprint is consistent with having left the evidence samples. King Harrow is Ezrin's dad, and their DNA fingerprints are consistent with this. King Harrow must have given one of his alleles to Ez at both loci, and you can see that they share this allele here and this one here. King Harrow is Callum's stepfather, so it makes sense that they do not have any alleles in common. Things aren't looking great for Ez, but we'll take a look at Bait before rushing to conclusions. You can see here that Bait is a complete match with the crime scene samples at locus 1. At locus 2, however, Bait has no alleles in common and therefore is not a complete match. So Bait can be excluded from having left the evidence sample. Therefore, based on this evidence, Ezrin stole the baker's jelly tarts. Ezrin, you really need to stop doing that. Tune in next week when we investigate more jelly tart thievery.